Things are about to get real, I think. Welcome back. This is the final DLC area that we're about to enter, Eleum Loyce. We've got pretty much the same litany, with only one placard actually telling us anything of particular worth. We visited here briefly once before, the first time we came through the Shrine of Winter. The exterior of Eleum Loyce certainly looks impressive. And it's got the same kind of DLC door that all the other areas have. Well, it's going to take more than that to deter our progress, though I suppose, in all fairness, we don't really have any reason to be here except that it's there. But what other reason do we need? It's like Mount Everest, except it's telling us to go away.
Go back.
Hal remains undaunted. Interesting. Okay, so although the king's pet appears to be invisible, that makes things somewhat difficult. Okay, new plan. Let's go the other way. Well, I'm sure that it's technically possible to beat that boss without being able to see it. I'm pretty confident that I don't have the skill or patience to do that. So instead of throwing ourselves at an invisible brick wall, let's explore our options a little bit. Down the right path, both literally and figuratively, we have some enemies. These ice soldiers are the main kind of enemy that you will find in Eleum Loyce. They are fairly dangerous, especially the ones with the spears. As sort of a running theme for these DLC enemies, the ones with the spears tend to be the most dangerous because shields are annoying. They're capable of inflicting bleed damage, which is also something you should be aware of, but their rapiers and spears can't actually pierce a physical shield. I mean, unless they just, drain your stamina bar. Drain your stamina bar. Words. Which is certainly possible, but provided that you're careful, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Like most of the other basic foot soldier enemies in the DLCs, these ice soldiers are very weak to backstabs. Their attacks tend to have a lot of wind-up and follow-through, so getting behind them is not exactly a difficulty. When taking them on, I would recommend use of at least some sort of shield. That's a no-go. Spear-wielding enemies can be especially dangerous in these narrow passageways, but to even out the odds, we also have a spear. I guess so. The quote-unquote wretch there doesn't actually do anything, so I'll just leave it be. Now, I figure, since we just got done with the Pilgrims of the Dark Covenant, it might be a good time to test out some of the miracles that we got from it. The first is Resonant Soul. Resonant Soul is an interesting miracle. Well, I suppose it's more of a hex than a miracle, I'm sorry. It's a Sacred Chime casted hex. Not a miracle, it's different. Anyway, Resonant Soul does above average damage for a projectile and does dark damage, for the exchange of costing 100 souls per cast. It is, at this point in the game, completely trivial to pony up the souls for that, so don't be shy about using it. And, you know, it's pretty quick. It's about the same cast speed as Dark Sphere. So if you're more faith-oriented, or you don't have any good sorcery catalysts, then this is a perfectly viable alternative. I hate people who leave their messages right in front of things. Dickheads. Resonant Soul actually comes in 3 varieties. The vanilla variety, which we're using, Great Resonant Soul, which costs up to 3,000 souls per cast, and has significantly fewer casts on its meter, but in return does, quite frankly, ridiculous amounts of damage, and Climax, which is a spell that uses literally all of your souls, and only has, I think, 1 cast to it, and in return it will basically just one-shot whatever you're pointing at. It's pretty strong, especially in PvP. This wide open area here is a little difficult. So when you run into a situation like that, the strategy remains the same. Try and get the enemies into a more manageable environment. This narrower corridor makes it easier to cordon off the enemies so you don't have to deal with so many things at once. Especially the guys shooting magic ice bolts at you. They're kind of an irritant. They don't do that much damage, but they will stagger you a little. That's sort of the big thing. A distraction is a distraction, even if it's weak. I was very nearly thwarted by my own favorite strategy, backing away slowly. Up next, we have a new variety of Ice Soldier, one that sports a great deal of crystalline growths on its back. To deal with this guy, who is immune to backstabs because of those growths, I want to bring out something with a little bit more stopping power than the Partisan. The Helix Halberd fits the bill nicely. also has a full durability bar, so making the switch is advantageous in that regard, too. Not made of repair powder, after all. A lot of the encounters in Frozen Eleum Loyce are similar to this, in that you have one guy up in your face and another couple guys just shooting ice bolts at you. It's a pretty difficult area, to be honest, and it has thwarted me many times. Not so much on this character, though. Hal is pretty well equipped to deal with the dangers of this place. Shields help. You may have noticed that the visibility while outside is somewhat lacking. You can see more clearly indoors, but once you head back out into the storm, then you'll have honestly some pretty significant trouble seeing things at a distance. It's not really a huge deal, but it's something you need to be aware of at least. Especially since the enemies are sort of that light bluish snowy color. They tend to blend in with the background pretty well, so if you're not paying attention, it's entirely possible you just miss some guys. And you will not find them until they have their rapiers in your backside. That's a lucky find. The ice rapier is actually probably one of the most powerful DLC weapons, and in fact one of the most powerful weapons in the game if you upgrade it, so we might try that out a little. Might not. I don't know. It's a dex weapon, and it does thrusting damage, so it's sort of on brand. If you can get them while they're attacking, with the counterattack bonus from just that thrusting weapons usually have, the Helix Halberd will take things out very quickly. Even here, where things are pretty beefy. Speaking of, this is a crystal golem. I rather like the design of these enemies. But unlike their younger brothers, they are vulnerable to backstabs. And since a lot of their attacks have a lot of wind-up and follow-through, even more so than the regular enemies, it's not especially difficult to simply get behind them and take them out that way. This is just rude, by the way. I refuse to be thwarted by ice. Well, that didn't work at all. Worth a try, I guess. No way to melt those, at least not in our arsenal. It's a bit of a drop, but there are some goodies down here. Not all the way down here. Don't fall off the edge. Do not be fooled. This view probably would be pretty nice if we could see anything. There we go. The Dark Clutch ring is just the latest and the last in the series of rings that increases a certain kind of elemental damage. I've never really gotten a whole lot of use out of those because I never found the boost to be that significant, at least in returns to the trade-off and more damage taken, but I think a dedicated caster build could probably get some work out of it. This encounter can be kind of difficult. If you let them surround you, you're in for a bad time. So again, try and aim to get them into this more or less cordoned off corridor here. It lets you deal with them one or two at a time instead of all at once. And given that 3 of the 4 enemies can actually inflict bleeding on you, you really don't want to take them on, I mean, without... Oh, wonderful. At very least in this game, that doesn't just, you know, stop all progress. Unlike in Bloodborne, where if you get disconnected from PSN, then you just get booted back to the title screen, because fuck you. So, no more funny messages for us, I guess, and we'll have to take on the boss solo. It's all part of the experience, I guess. I've noticed that against these enemies, the Santier's Spear is less effective than the Helix Halberd, mostly because I find that the Twin Blade stance hitboxes are a little off when it comes to these guys. I'm not sure what it is precisely, but it seems like some of my hits miss when they shouldn't. This looks very much like a door, and these very much look like braziers I can light up. Unfortunately, we can't light a torch in this storm. And it would just be improper to light them with pyromancy, so we're out of luck for now. Hopefully there will be some way to either wait this storm out or put a stop to it one way or another. That somewhat out-of-place Dregling quote-unquote guards a hidden area by busting through the boxes. We end up out here overlooking that bridge from earlier. A somewhat more fearsome guardian appears further down the path. The crystal golem is, well, like I said before, quite vulnerable to backstabs. But I think it's just a really cool enemy. The way that they just sort of grow and shrink their body parts. And they've got several varieties of attacks, most of which can be sort of deduced by the shape, or general shape, of which their body parts take. Old bell helm, huh? I like it. Friends at the bell tower are going to be so jealous. This helmet has a hidden property that you cannot actually get headshot while you're wearing it. It's sort of a niche benefit, but it's certainly helpful in certain situations. For example, if you took it to, say, Black Gulch, then the poison statues would not be able to stun lock you quite so effectively by hitting you in the head. I mean, it would still be obnoxious as hell, and this helmet doesn't really have good poison resist, but it's something worth noting. After a one-way drop, we find our way to another bonfire. Quite welcome at this point. When the crystal growths become enormous like that, they'll use them like great hammers, but when they become longer and slimmer, they prefer to use them more like spears. Now, even though I've been more or less chumping on these guys so far, don't underestimate them. They do an awful lot of damage. and their somewhat versatile bodies let them do some surprising attacks. You have to pay close attention to what kind of formation they put forth. Unlike other enemies who are more or less bound by the type of weapon that they use and what they can do, the crystal golems have a lot more flexibility when it comes to what kind of ways they can attack you. Oh, wonderful. Counter-sniping is not always the best use of your time. Don't underestimate the one-handed stance either. Santier's spear is, much like the crystal golems we've been fighting, very versatile. So, as powerful as the twin blade stance is, don't feel like that's the only thing you need to use. The range and poke that you get from the one-handed stance is very valuable against a lot of enemies, especially enemies with high poise that can sort of tank through a lot of the twin blade hits, and then punish you severely, like the Iron Warriors from Broom Tower. Now, this is an interesting ring, suffering somewhat from bad translation, but interesting nonetheless. Gain surprises, but take increased damage. Receive various benefits. Mostly this ring just sort of increases a lot of your passive stats, like you can see our health bar went up, our stamina bar went up, stuff like that. It has a lot of general benefits to it, though you will take more damage with it equipped, so be careful. It's pretty good, I guess. I'm not a big fan of anything that makes me take more damage without, like, boosting my own in return. But there's definitely some benefits to it. Another variety of enemy is the rampart golem. They're sort of a fusion between the crystal golems and the ice soldiers. They're quite beefy, and they have some of the mastery of crystals that the golems do, along with spear and shield configurations the more dangerous soldiers do. They sacrifice a bit of versatility to retain power and general fighting effectiveness with the spear and shield setup. Interestingly enough, we can see that outside the walls, the storm is not actually going. So it must be artificial in nature, meaning that perhaps there's a way to put a stop to it. We should probably take note of this peculiar-looking treasure chest trapped in the ice. The rampart golems do, however, share the common weakness of being quite vulnerable to backstabs. Perhaps more so than any of their counterparts. Unlike the crystal golems, they have projectile attacks as well, such as their spear toss, and the ability to create a sort of crystal shockwave on the ground. Neither are especially threatening, but they're things you need to be aware of to safely get through the area. They are also vulnerable to guard breaks, though it's a little dangerous, simply because with the spear and shield setup, you can get punished for trying it and failing. You can even get punished a little bit for trying and succeeding. Also of note is that the rampart golems can use Estus flasks. very slowly, so it's not really a big deal. And they also drop equipment, which, when equipped, is heavy armor that makes you look quite a bit like a rampart golem yourself, which offers high magic resist and general benefits. I don't really feel inclined to farm for it, but it's kind of cool. This is a somewhat important fork. Do not go to the right. Just don't do it. You will die. There are invisible assholes over there, much like the king's pet Ava. And while Ava had an obnoxious grab attack that you couldn't really dodge, those guys have even more obnoxious backstabs that you have no idea when are coming. So just don't go that way. Not until you have some way to deal with invisible things. Immolation, maybe? By pulling this lever, we actually open up a path from all the way back at the beginning of the area. We raised the platform that was somewhat distressingly filled with coffins. And by doing so, we can access the area beyond it. Eventually. We'll get back to it later. I would say that the ice soldiers with the crystal growths on their back are probably the most dangerous enemies here, simply because you can't take advantage of backstabs. I imagine that if you tried, you'd just sort of bounce off all the crystals. Dogs, as usual, are also pretty dangerous in their own right, especially in pretty great number here. The doorway will take care of them fairly effectively, though they'll still probably take some damage simply because there's so many of them. It's not quite what I meant to do, but it pays to be polite sometimes. It would be nice to ascend the tower, but it's actually impossible at the moment because the stairs are out. There's also one last dog up here, as well as an ice soldier lying in wait. We can at least console ourselves with the soul of a great hero. The soldier appears to have gotten impatient and come down after us. He probably would have been just fine if he had just waited up there. No such luck for him. Wait, what? There's nothing... I really am in a dream. This curious invisible ladder will actually lead you up to where that ice soldier was waiting, complete with a chest. Inside is the Splintering Lightning Spear Miracle. It requires a quite frankly ridiculous amount of faith to use, but it's pretty darn strong. Especially since a lot of things in this game are weak to lightning. I might toy around with soul vessels later to try and respec and use some of this more exotic sorcery that I find. This is another one-way path down, so be prepared before you take that leap.
Turn away and never look back. No one must ever find that which is sheltered in the Loyce.
I'm not feeling very obedient today, especially after getting mauled by an invisible monster thing. This is the main prize and the main purpose of coming this way. The Eye of the Priestess is a key item that will allow you to see the unseen. Not open doors. Not actually a key. It's an eyeball. I'm not sure I like the implications of that item description, but when you're backed into a corner, sometimes you just need to shove an old eyeball into your face. Had we proceeded without taking that eyeball, this guy would be invisible and we'd probably be dead by now because he would have gotten behind us and stabbed us in the back with his stupid hammer. Invisible, however, he is not at all a threat. We could also now see that ladder if we were so inclined, but since the prompt exists whether or not you can see it, we won't be needing to take a turn trip. As a side effect of picking up the eye, these retainers, which they are called, are now active and quite willing to kill us. They're not a huge deal to deal with, but they will fire spells at you, and they are complicating factors in encounters that did not previously have them. But we'll deal with that later. Until then, let's take a nice rest.